So I'm going to be talking today about how invasive species get here. And specifically, I'm going to focus on aquatic invasive species and how they move around the world. And this, I put this slide deck together with Ted Grosholz. So in UC Cooperative Extension, we have folks like me. I'm a county-based cooperative extension advisor covering Los Angeles and Ventura counties. We also run programs that you might have heard us talking about a little bit before, the Master Gardeners, California Naturalist, 4-H, and then we have ag advisors, natural resources advisors like me, for youth development advisors, and folks who work on nutrition stuff. So a bunch of different kinds of folks in cooperative extension. So I am an advisor, and Ted is a specialist working on invasive species, and specifically aquatic invasive species at UC Davis. So we've got some examples from Northern California and Southern California, freshwater and nearshore marine today that we're going to be talking about. So again, we talked about what invasive species are. They're non-native species who by the definition, what makes them invasive is that they cause environmental harm. So certainly California is an amazing place where you can grow pretty much anything. And we have plenty of exotic species that are not invasive, meaning they don't sort of escape from the areas where they're planted, or there's aquaculture or something like that going on. It's only those that do that really are the ones that we consider invasive. They can be diseases, they can be predators, competitors, parasites, and they can cause harm to people directly by being a health threat. They can damage crops and infrastructure and the physical environment. And of course, what I'm mostly interested in is those that affect wildland areas, and specifically rivers are kind of my area of specialty. And one last thing to note, this has always been an ongoing problem, invasive species, and I'll give you some older and some newer examples today, but their spread may be exacerbated by the fact that we're changing the climate, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. So when we think about invasive species, we kind of think about two different cycles or sort of timelines. The timeline on which they first get to an area, but often they don't actually expand their presence right away. And then the timeline at which we can address them as a problem. So if we can prevent things from getting here, that's great. Let's see, I've got to use my pointer here. That's fantastic. That's going to be the most sort of cost efficient, resource efficient, and effective time to gain control of an invasive species. Later, when the population establishes, if it's just in one area, we might be able to eradicate it. It starts to spread and expand its range, and then we hopefully contain it and keep it, okay, it's a problem in Marin County, but we want to keep it out of, we want to keep it from spreading to Monterey. And then once it really kind of gets out of there, we're just trying to suppress it and trying to keep up. So if we can get to things early, that's great. Where do they come from? Well, all over the world, but certainly we have a lot of species that are invasive in California that are native to North America. And we also have a lot that come from Asia and South America. And again, I mostly work in Southern California, so what we usually find is that it's the species that come from areas that are climatically somewhat similar to California, where things really take hold. And this is just a map kind of showing you that same idea. What kinds of problems they can cause? Well, often with aquatic invasives, and we see this with some of the algae especially, they form a monoculture that really outcompetes native species. And Quagga mussels would be another good example of something that just covers the substrate. So none of our native sort of substrate-oriented species, benthic species that attach to either the bottom or piers or whatever, there's just a space for them. They can change the physical environment. So they can change things like water clarity and light availability. Water hyacinth, I'll talk about, is an issue there. So it actually covers the surface and there's no light available for photosynthesizing organisms in the water column. And they can undermine banks. And crayfish are going to be an example of that, where they really dig into the banks and can lead to bank failure. They prey on native species, reduce water quality, and in some cases quantity. I'm not going to talk too much about things like arundo, but we'll have folks talking about that later on. But that's something that really sucks a lot of water right out of our rivers. So it's not available for aquatic species. And then they cause a lot of damage to both, to all different kinds of water infrastructure, including just physically blocking things up for transportation or blocking up pipes that we'd use for water diversion. And why do they establish? Why are invasive species a problem? Well, I think most people kind of know, sure, they come without their parasites and predators and whatever keeps them in check where they're native to, but they usually also have either high reproductive rates through regular sexual reproduction, or they can reproduce asexually, either clonally or through a rhizome, and we'll give some examples of that where like a little piece of a plant can cause a problem. Doing a time check for myself there. They can be adapted to the local conditions really well, so that they can spread, say, without, if you think about a plant spreading in, you know, a drier area of Southern California, if they can't spread without being watered, it's not likely to really be that invasive, because our native plants can adapt to low water for most of the year. And a lot of them tend to thrive in disturbed environments. And so what I want to do today is give you a couple of different case studies. After this one, the others will focus on an individual exotic species, but I just wanted to share with you a little bit about a research project I've been doing for several years now, which is looking at the fish community of the Los Angeles River. And what we find, and much to the surprise of some people I speak to, is that there's a lot of fish in the LA River. And they're relatively healthy in terms of actual health. We don't see a lot of tumors. We don't see a lot of just, you know, signs of disease. So they're healthy, and there's a lot of them, but very few of them are native. Almost all of them are exotic and or invasive species. And what we find is that it's predominantly warm water fish that like perennial water, and I'll explain what that means in a minute, that now make up the community there. So if we think about the daily maximum temperature, one of the things that we did is we measured temperature in different parts of the Los Angeles River, and you know, temperatures are elevated. It's urban runoff coming in, it's a lot of concrete channel. We don't have a lot of riparian shading. We've really lost a lot of the connection to groundwater springs that might cool the water down. And so we have these elevated water temperatures. And what you're seeing here on all these lines is the sort of maximum temperature that a lot of our native fishes can at least survive in. So what do you think the temperature requirement of largemouth bass is? Right up there at the top. So that largemouth bass would just be an example. This could be green sunfish, this could be channel catfish, but we have all of these species that are doing really well because we've altered the environment to make it better for them than it is for our native species. So elevated temperature I talked about in terms of what favors the exotic fish there, but also having perennial flow. So a lot of our, and the LA River is just an example here, but a lot of our streams in drier areas of California are naturally what we call intermittent. So there may be areas where there's water present all year, but they might not be connected to each other until the rainy season. Or we may have streams that go dry completely and only flow during the wet season. Well, some of our native, you know, fishes are going to need water year round, but a lot of our amphibians and reptiles that are associated with aquatic systems can handle those streams that go dry seasonally. A lot of our native fishes can handle streams that that have limited flow seasonally. But as soon as we add all this water with urban runoff or by putting in dams or things like that, where we have water year round and we have connectivity year round and we have these elevated temperatures, we've just created like bass habitat essentially. And we also have increased nutrient loading. So things like we have a lot of Chinese carp in the Los Angeles River as well. They feed on algae. We have a lot more algae than we sort of ought to naturally because of all of these nutrients. And I guess the larger point that I'm trying to make to just keep in mind for all aquatic invasive species is, you know, it's kind of like, it's not their fault. A lot of times it's because we've altered environments so much that we're really favoring these exotic species. So when they get here, they do really well. And if we want to address exotic species, it's not just about sort of catching them all and killing them. It's also about restoring functional ecosystems that are meant to support native species. So with that, I'll go back to sort of modes of introduction. Just do a little time check here. So I'm just going to take you through several of these things. I'm not going to talk too much about sort of the different taxonomic groups here, but I will give you some examples of biofouling and ballast water, aquaculture and bait, and then ornamentals and food fish a little bit. Oops, wrong computer. So ballast water and hull fouling, essentially what this means is for ships to remain upright and be able to work well in waters. I'm sure there's a better way to say that. They have really varying loads, right? If they're not carrying the same amount of materials around all the time, they keep their weight pretty much equal by bringing in water into these ballast tanks in the lower portions of the ship. And if they fill up with ballast water in one area, then they get to a new area and they load a lot of cargo, they want to get rid of that ballast water. And so it used to be that they would just dump it into their new water body, and anything that was living in that water, which could include both adult and larval forms of other organisms, got introduced into that new water. There are some methods now of either superheating ballast tanks or sterilizing them in other ways to reduce that. An example of something that probably, this is kind of a complicated story because there are probably multiple things going on, but Quagga mussels are a good example. They're native to the Dnieper River in the Ukraine. They probably got into the Great Lakes in the US, in the Erie Canal and Lake Ontario from larvae in ballast water that was brought from on ships coming from Europe. They then got into the Colorado River, probably on trailered boats. So this is kind of multiple modes of transmission here. And then they showed up in reservoirs in San Diego that receive water from the Colorado River. So probably larval eggs and larvae of quagga mussels actually came in through the water transfer, interbasin transfer system, bringing water from the Colorado River into California to use. This is, I'll just spend a little bit of time on these guys. I'm not going to go into as much detail on some of the other invasives as we go through this, but these guys have become a huge problem. They've spread throughout California. This is a little bit out of date. It's from 2017. And you can see some of the infrastructure problems that they cause. So up here I believe this is a dam gate. These are some slides that Ted gave me. This I know is a dam lift gate. Oops. Go back for just a minute. He's got a timer on these. And you can just see examples of how they might fill up a pipe here and just other things that they just encrusted over. When they do this, they also change the water clarity because they're sucking tiny single-celled algae out of the water and eating them, and then they're pooping everywhere. So they're increased to water, reducing water quality and also actually changing water clarity, which affects the native organisms. Hull fouling, this is another example that comes in with shipping, basically when you have these encrusting organisms. This is a tunicate here. There's some other algae and other little cnidarians and things right in here, growing on the bottom of ships. And not just big ships, but also boats. And so one thing that we think probably came in through hull fouling is what we call devil weed, Sargassum horneri. It's native to Japan and sort of the East China, South China Seas. It was first detected, and Ted's got timers on the slides he sent me, sorry. First detected in Long Beach and Catalina, and now it's really spread from Baja all the way up to Santa Barbara. And it impacts native kelp in the understory. Again, this is something that just covers every surface and is continuing to spread. Hitchhikers are another example. So these are again, it's moving equipment around. They can be things that are attached to boats, waders, fishing equipment, water sampling equipment. And our first example that we're going to get to are those New Zealand mud snails, but you'll see right in here, this is New Zealand mud snails on the laces of a hiking boot right here. So you can see how it's easy to spread them around, and I'll talk in more detail about that towards the end, stopping aquatic hitchhikers, but it really has to do with making sure you're not bringing mud, organisms, pieces of plants, and even just water around with you when you go from water body to water body. So these guys, New Zealand mud snails, they were introduced in California, as far as we know, sometime before 2001. And they can have significant impacts on stream systems because they end up just, again, covering the surface. And they're continuing to expand their range. One kind of interesting thing about these guys, some snails have this and some snails don't, but when they pull their foot into their shell, some snails, and these are an example of them, have a little other piece of shell called an operculum, and they can seal up really tight. And these guys, New Zealand mud snails, can actually survive through the digestive tract of a trout. So we think in some areas they got into hatcheries, and when they then stocked the fish into other water bodies, these guys hitchhiked along inside their digestive tract. Okay, moving on to another example, bait stocking in aquaculture. These can be all kinds of different things that people move around when they dump bait, or sometimes these are intentional introductions. So stocking can be fish that we want to fish, and those fish plus any parasites that they have with them can spread that way. But mosquito fish are another example where we're not stocking them for food, we're stocking them because we hope they're going to help control mosquito populations, but they've been spread all over the place in California. So another example here of something that probably came in as bait, red swamp crayfish. It's native to the drainages of the Gulf of Mexico, basically. And this burrows into banks. This is a hole one has dug right here, and it really destabilizes them. They're also really voracious predators. And in LA County and some of the streams in the Santa Monica Mountains where I work, they seem to be having a significant impact on native amphibians, on native newts. They eat the newt eggs and young newts. So, and they'll also eat native fish eggs too, and small fish. Another example here, likely introduced as food, not as bait, but as things people really just wanted to eat and wanted to have locally with them, the Chinese mitten crab. This is our only freshwater crab that you can find in California. We don't have any native freshwater crabs. It really has had a lot of costly impacts on water purveyance infrastructure. We haven't found it a lot since 2005, but I did just want to point out this really funky picture. So you can buy live crabs in vending machines in China and Japan and maybe Korea as well to eat. So they're a really popular food source. We don't know for sure who introduced them, but it may have been, you know, people wanting to have this native food that they like and bringing it and actively putting it in our streams. Asian carp are another example that sometimes they were introduced either as a fishery or to control actually aquatic plants in some areas because they are plant-eating fish. They can grow huge, 4 feet long and 100 pounds. There's several different species that we kind of lump together. Some were found in the 80s and eradicated from California in the 90s. As far as we know, we don't have any of these sort of really problematic Asian carp species here now, although we do have just common carps. They print as carpio in a lot of our urban streams. But these guys you might have heard about actually like not the silver carp really jump out of the water, and they've like knocked into people in boats and stuff over in the Great Lakes region. So we're on the lookout for these guys coming in. And they certainly will eat a lot of our native species and really outcompete with a lot of species too. Aquarium and ornamental release. So I'm not going to talk too much about this guy, but certainly in Southern California, I'd say throughout the state, it's a problem. This is the Redeared slider that competes with especially Western pond turtle, which is an endangered species. And this, I could go to downtown LA right now and buy a bunch of these in these little containers. This is from LA's Chinatown. I'm sure it's the same in other communities throughout the state. This is actually, apparently you can buy them from Petco. And, you know, if you want to have a Redeared slider in the tank in your house, that's great, but don't free Nemo or whatever. Don't free don't dump your aquariums. Another species that probably came in through aquarium dumps is killer algae, Caulerpa taxifolia. This is a popular ornamental plant. It was in 10 years in the Mediterranean, it spread over 7,400 acres. It just outcompetes everything. It just covers all surfaces. We found it in Southern California, I believe in the San Diego Bay in 2000, and really aggressively treated it, and it is now illegal to sell in California. Water hyacinth probably came in as a pond ornamental, again, reproduces clonally. And it's been spreading in the Sacramento Delta. And this is a picture here. This is a boat, and this is supposed to be a waterway. So you can see how this would cause some problems. So just very quickly, because I'm running short on time as our first speaker. Oh wait, no, I'm not. You have till 12:50, don't we? Okay, good. There will be some time for questions. So shifting gears for a minute to what can you do? The big 3 things to think about is clean, drain, and dry. Your boats, your hiking equipment, your fishing gear, your sampling gear. We actually did a whole program. These slides are actually from a program we did for public works agencies and folks who work maintaining runoff channels and stuff. So the first thing to do is look for it, inspect your gear on site, and then scrub it to remove any mud, sand, or plant or animal remnants. Stiff brush is good. If you're not on site, when I've gone out and worked in areas where we'll have invasive species, we put all of our gear in plastic tubs, and I'll talk about what we did with it in just a minute. And then we would put on fresh gear at every site that we went to. So we just wore cheap rubber boots to go into streams. If you are in more of a professional context, or if you're a boater, there might be a high pressure wash available. That's great as long as that water isn't just running off into the water body. So yeah, scrubbing and just getting the stuff off is the first step. And then drying. So certainly with a boat, making sure every water is drained. When you're leaving a water body, leave all that water there and anything that lives with it, and then start thinking about how you're going to dry it. So maybe it's, if you normally store your boat in a garage, maybe it's leaving it outside in the sun for a while, kind of depends on where conditions are, and then going back and checking that everything is dry, that bilge tanks are dry, that water hasn't collected anywhere. If you're more of a hiker or a wading angler, you might be able to put some of your clothes and stuff into a clothes dryer, and that works well too. And then, you know, just make sure you're not, say, throwing stuff into a compost pile that's right next to a waterway, that you're throwing stuff in the trash and disposing of it properly. You can also freeze things, and this is effective for a lot of organisms. So I did a survey of New Zealand mud snails in streams in LA and Ventura counties. And as I said, we would change our gear at every site, and then we had a big chest freezer, and we would throw everything in the chest freezer for at least 8 hours. At least, usually we do it at least overnight. Often we just leave it there until we went out the next month to do do surveys, again, after scrubbing everything off. So yeah, you can freeze stuff. And then the other thing to do is think about how you're planning your visit. So if you know you're going on a backpacking trip and you're going to be visiting several areas and you know that some of them might be infested and some of them aren't, go to the cleanest sites first. Don't go to the infested ones and then go to the uninfested ones. Go from upstream to downstream. That makes sense. Yes, go from upstream to downstream if you're thinking about things that might be coming up through an estuary, or just, you know, downstream waters are always receiving more input of things. Multiple sets of gear I mentioned, and then just keeping track of it so that everybody knows what gear's been decontaminated and is ready to go out back in the field again and what hasn't. And with that, here's contact information for myself and Ted, and I'm ready to answer questions if people have them.
Wow, thanks, Sabrina. That was an amazing overview of how all these various aquatic organisms get here and get moved around by people. And it's kind of striking that some of these are things we can each help with, like cleaning our own recreational equipment. And then some of them are like ballast water, things that require significant policy work with industry. So yeah, I would be very curious to hear what questions and ideas listeners have. Please go ahead and put ideas and questions into the chat, and Sabrina will see those and be able to address them.
Is this a question for me, Doug? What things are you getting from elsewhere?
Yeah, I think of things like, and I don't know if the snakehead fish is ever going to be a problem here, or anacondas, or, but there are just some amazing aquatic invasives elsewhere in the country, which are just fascinating to consider. And I don't know if they might or might not be problems in California.
Yeah, you know what? Ted would be better to answer that question than me. And you could also ask Valerie in a couple days when she talks about Nutria too. I'm trying to think of something right at the moment that I've been particularly concerned about.
Well, and for folks who perhaps haven't seen these on the news, there are the snakehead fish is a fish that actually can transport itself over land. I think of it as being a problem in the DC area, and it basically can drag itself from one pond to another, which is a really interesting way to spread. And then you may have seen sensationalistic videos of monitor lizards, well, I guess that's not aquatic, but and pythons, etc., in Florida, where a lot of things seem to thrive and have decimated native wildlife. And so there's a lot of different concerns in different parts of the country. And as Sabrina mentioned on Thursday, I believe it is, Wednesday, thank you. Valerie is speaking about the Nutria, which is actually a mammal that exists in large numbers in Chesapeake Bay and in the Mississippi River Delta and Louisiana, and is causing huge problems there, and it's getting started here. And so she's going to talk about efforts to stop it here.
Yeah, I was actually in New Orleans not too long ago, and we were talking a lot about Nutria.
I think they have it to the extent where they can't really get rid of it, and so they have bounty hunts where people bring in, I don't know if they bring in carcasses or what, but I think they've tried to establish eating it. I'm not sure if that's working, if it's actually good to eat or not?
Apparently, so they had several chefs. We tried it. They had several chefs working on it, and it can be good, but it's just kind of hard to get people over that idea.
Mm-hmm.
They also tried to develop a fur industry for it. So,
interesting.
Yeah.
Not quite as nice as beaver, I guess.
Okay, so I've got another question here from Deb, Sonoma County Master Gardeners. So I'm really glad you asked this question, Deb. She asked, when you say to clean off on site, as long as debris doesn't return to waterway, where can it go? I actually should clarify. That's one of the reasons you want to clean on site. Then it's fine if it ends up going back into the same waterway you just got out of. So I wasn't quite clear on that, but so if you that's why you want to rinse off your boat and sort of scrub all of your equipment at the site that might have been contaminated. And you never know what's contaminated, so it's just a good habit to get into. Hopefully that answers your question. Same with the aquatic plants. Again, if it's already there, it's kind of already there. Oh, we got a lot of questions coming in here too. So Marissa asks, are there techniques to decontaminate large equipment used in waterways, for example, large excavators that track out mud, etc.? There are, Marissa, and I didn't really, not quite knowing who would be on the phone today, I left some things out. So what I've seen in a lot of public works yards is that there's actually a piece of equipment that you can get, fire departments use this as well, oftentimes, and it's sort of a self-contained, it's several, tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it's a self-contained wash station where you kind of drive up a little ramp and a little barrier closes, and you get a very hot water, high pressure wash of the equipment, and then it drains into tanks. It doesn't just run off the site from there. And then you can, again, it's very hot water. You might have killed everything anyway, but you can empty those tanks and kind of spread out the bilge, and again, try to make sure everything's dead, and get rid of that material. And they use that to get weed seed off of things as well.
A couple other questions, Sabrina. Somebody saw a demonstration at Lake Mendocino where dogs were used to detect invasives in boats. Yep. Is that a widespread method of detection?
It is something that we're starting to use more and more in California. It is widespread. Dogs are great for this, and we actually have a whole unit in Cal Fish and Wildlife. Again, I don't know if Valerie's on the phone here now, but sort of priming her for some questions about things other than Nutria too. But yeah, we have a dog crew in California that we use to detect quagga and zebra mussels.
And
that works really well.
Somebody mentioned seeing some species like tamarisk, for instance, spreading upstream. Do you have thoughts on how that happens?
Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. I mean, certainly tamarisk seed. I have to say, I want to hate like all invasive plants, but I find both tamarisk and broom like really attractive. So don't ask. I hate fennel. Can't stand the fennel. But yeah, it does have those really fluffy, pink flowers, and the seeds are really small. And I think they are wind-blown, wind-distributed seeds. The other thing would be, people and animals kind of dragging seeds up. Okay, I want to take a minute here, and I can answer more questions at the same time, but I'd like to launch a poll here. It's a quick poll with a couple of questions here. Everyone should now be seeing this on their screen. Seeing just 2 questions. Did you learn anything new in the webinar today? And a list of potential actions, and please choose all that apply, that you might be thinking about taking after hearing this. So if you plan to take any of those, let us know about it. And while you guys are doing that, I'll still look back through and see if we have additional questions. Anybody else? Doug, did you have any other comments or
Oh, I
no?
was just reading through the questions. I guess
Oh, sorry, I'll be quiet.
I just finished filling it out. I didn't want to interrupt others, but one of the things that strikes me is that there is very much a parallel for just terrestrial or land-based recreation to what you're talking about in terms of cleaning. Moving weed seeds in mud on your boots is problematic, and also the more we learn about water molds like Phytophthora in the soil and how those are affecting vegetation in California, one of the things that is just kind of smart best practices is to not move soil around unnecessarily. Certainly during the wet season is the most challenging time. So getting in the practice of brushing off your boots, we actually have hoof picks that we distribute that are useful for that, getting in the crannies of your treads and getting mud out, and then also spraying, is it ammonia, I believe, that's sprayed on there. No, I believe it's isopropyl alcohol. But there are best practices for keeping your footwear clean.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. There are some specific, I didn't want to get too into chemical decontamination because that can be really specific to each organism. But with the New Zealand mud snails that I've done, personally done some work on, we found that there was one specific formulation of Formula 409 that worked really well. And they changed it, and then it stopped working as well. It was a drag. But I've definitely seen bleach as well, and of course that risks damage to your gear, but it's maybe a necessary harm.
I don't know if you know about this, but at one point there was a partnership with the pet trade to work on best practices for pet owners not releasing their pets, including aquatic species from aquariums, both fish and plants. Are you aware of an active program today doing that?
Working with the pet trade? Yeah, there's actually a group called Habitattitude that tries to kind of share information about that. I don't know that there's anything quite on the order of like CalHip, if that's what you were thinking about, the horticultural invasives partnership. Yeah, definitely. We've talked to a lot of sports fishing groups about this stuff, and a lot have been really interested and on board. I've given a lot of talks to anglers groups as well, and there's some effort to reach out, to the pet trade. Deb asked me a question here in the chat about whether state and federal agencies are taking action on the intentional and cultural introduction of exotics. In most cases, a lot of these pests it's illegal to sell them. I don't know if you guys saw this, I glossed over it pretty quickly, but on the slide about water hyacinth, I also had a little sign there, and if I didn't have the name of the store, but if people were familiar with the Walmart symbol, apparently you can go to walmart.com and order water hyacinth. I didn't click through to see if it stops you from buying it in certain states. But yes, sorry, getting back to state and federal agencies. So you'll note that the definition of invasive species that we use is from the National Invasive Species Information Center, and that's actually part of a interagency federal program on invasive species that includes Department of Interior and USDA, and I think Homeland Security as well, to try to enforce laws on importing invasive species, importing exotic species, and just bringing them in with you. And then Cal Fish and Wildlife and CDFA and state parks and other agencies are working together within California on the relatively new California Invasive Species Council.
Well, and certainly State Department of Fish and Wildlife regulates certain species as injurious. And I even think one of these recent years for Invasive Species Awareness Week, the theme for the youth art contest was "Don't Let It Loose." There is a don'tletitloose.com program for responsible pet ownership. So that's one place if anybody's interested in being aware or raising awareness in others of pet ownership and not letting animals or plants loose. That's a good spot to go.
Sabrina, it looks like you have 2 questions in the chat that were just added.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just answering. Deb asked again if talks are going to be available offline. The slides, you can contact me if you want to talk about the slides, but there will be a recording, a video of this presentation available offline. It will be posted at the same site where you got information today, and we'll let you know when that's ready. Rob asked if there are areas of Ventura County other than Matilaha Canyon that are high risk for New Zealand mud snails, and yes, definitely there are. They're actually present up through Piru Creek, which is part of the Santa Clara watershed now. So the biggest population we saw was at Frenchman's Flat going into the Piru Canyon, but we also found them up above Pyramid Lake. I'm sorry, up above Lake Piru. And then there was another question up here from Elliot. Hi, Elliot. Is there an aquatic equivalent to allelopathy? Meaning, are there plants changing the water composition to further their own success or possibly help to stop the spread of others? Definitely, yeah. And there are things that are allelopathic, meaning that they're actually producing chemicals that inhibit the growth of competitive species. It's not just plants, some of the invertebrates as well. And they definitely do change water, physical attributes of the water column by doing things like changing water clarity and stuff. And we certainly do that too. And then I'll also mention that there are natives that we're looking at. I think Beatrice Nobuo Berman tomorrow will be talking about this in a tree context. But we're looking for we're always looking for biocontrol agents, and they might be native organisms that we can sort of foster to help spread things. And Deb, one last question. Who are the largest contributors of inducing exotics, individuals or corporate industries? Well, it depends on the exotics, but I would say that there's a lot of things going on. So globalization and just trade and shipping from other countries. I gave you some examples of ballast water. There's also wooden packaging material that we know tree pests have come in from. So it's really a mix. It's really a mix. Okay, it is now 12:56. I think we are, we've almost run this topic out. Thank you to everyone who completed the poll. Sarah, did you just close the poll? Or did it close on its own?
Yep, I just did it.
Okay, I'm actually going to relaunch it just for a second. If anybody, oh, no, I won't. Never mind. I don't want to clear the existing results. Okay, If anybody has any thoughts or other questions, you can email me or Ted. Let's see, how do I get out of here? I've got too many things on my screen right now. But here's our contact information one more time if you want to jot it down. And you can also do searches for us. And I just want to thank everybody for coming, and hope that hope to see you again tomorrow.
Thank you very much, everybody.